Once again, I want to say exactly how cold that water was. So, yeah. You know, early on when I was beginning ministry, I was very lonely. I was a single youth pastor, a long way from home, and there was a man that I had a lot of respect for. He was kind of a long-term youth pastor, one of those guys that's going to do it all of their life, and he was older than me, and I asked him, I said, how do you develop friendships? And I said, who are your friends? He said, you stay a place long enough, and the people become your friends. Best piece of ministry advice I'd ever gotten. And I can say after 7 years here, this has so far been my richest experience in ministry. So today we're going to tell the story of Joseph as a part of our epic series. Have you ever used the phrase, I told you there was nothing to worry about? Or maybe you said this one, I didn't see that coming. Or if I would have known blank, I wouldn't have done blank. All these relate to another phrase you're very familiar with that says hindsight is 20/20, which refers to perspective. When we're in the middle of something, it's very difficult to have perspective. And so since it's impossible for us to gain perspective because we don't see the end from the beginning, we need to have a faith in a person who does see the end from the beginning. So let me read to you Psalm 139, verses 14 through 16. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. There's the phrase. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. Just as a caveat, I want to say for God to know our days isn't necessarily to mean that He has already predestined those days. Those are different things. But that He knows all of our days. I'm getting to a point in my life, in my walk with Christ, that I'm starting to gain a lot more comfort in knowing that He knows where I am and what I'm walking through, as opposed to me being able to control where I am and what I'm walking through. Did you get that? And that is a period of growth. It's a growth thing that happens in your walk with Christ as your trust grows in Him, that you get more peaceful no matter what your circumstance looks like, because you're not gauging your response based on what you can control. You're gauging on who sees the beginning from the end. So today we're going to tell Joseph's story, and if there's any story in Scripture that will drive home this point, that's Joseph. Here are some spiritual lessons that I've learned studying through Joseph. One is that when our hearts are yielded to God, nothing is wasted. No circumstance, no matter how hard it is wasted. I've learned that if I don't lose focus or my objective, and I can stay focused and stay objective on that focus, that the circumstance doesn't impact the finish line. And then I've learned that the way forward isn't always straight. Have you learned that yet? That the way forward many times means there's backward. There means there's ups, it means there's downs, but it doesn't mean it's not still moving forward. So in 1968, Andrew Lloyd Webber composed a musical called Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and he lent me this today. And so I'm going to attempt to tell the story of Joseph today through the coats that Joseph wore. You probably are more familiar with the more famous one, but there are others that he wore as well. Let's start reading from Genesis 37, 2 through 4. It says, this is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers. How old was he? The sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. He's 17, he's the youngest of his brothers, and he seems to like the fact that he can tell on his brothers. Now Israel, if you remember Jacob last week when we talked about Jacob, Jacob's name gets changed to Israel. Okay, so this is Jacob. Now Israel, or Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for him. Kind of grown out of this one. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. The firstborn for Jacob was Reuben. All of the blessings and the love and all the attention given to Joseph really probably belonged to Reuben. But what we learned last week, if you were here, and you can always go back and watch it, or if you're familiar with the story of Jacob, Jacob was the secondborn, and Jacob received the blessing. And now this is kind of moving forward. Reuben deserved this blessing, but because Joseph was born to Rachel, the wife that Jacob really loved, and this firstborn became his favorite. Now, it seems that God had something in store for Joseph as well, because he gave Joseph a dream. The first dream he gave Joseph was that he was in the fields with his brothers, and they're baling straw and hay and wheat, and they do it in sheaves, and they stand them up. And he goes and tells his brothers that God gave him this dream, and then all of their sheaves bowed to his. And they told another story that not only did that happen, but the sun and the moon bowed to him. Now, if you already have to walk around with something like this, see, you just get beat up walking in high school with this, you know what I'm saying? So if you already got the robe, and you've already got the favor and the favor of your dad, and then God goes and gives you this vision, these dreams that even your mom and dad are going to bow to you. A 17-year-old handles that in a very certain way. He flaunts it. How do you not, right? But and so he gets something mixed up at 17 that I think he learns later on in his life. And one of those is the favor of God and the blessings of God aren't to say that we are the favorite of God. See, God's favor doesn't have a limitation. So if I'm favored of God, that doesn't mean you're disfavored. And if you're favored of God, it doesn't mean that I'm disfavored. See, we have a tendency to look at positions and we say, well, that's favored and this one's not favored. And God isn't choosing Joseph as a favorite over anyone. But he has a role for Joseph to play, very specific, knowing his end from his beginning. But at 17, Joseph doesn't handle it real well. So Jacob's sons are out tending flocks, and Jacob sends his son Joseph to go look out after them, really probably to spy on them. And he's already brought one bad report on them. So on this particular occasion, Joseph in all his glory is tracking down his brothers to see what they're doing with the sheep and the fields. And they see him from a distance, and they said they hated him. They hated him. He said, let's kill him. So they take Joseph, they strip the coat from him, and they throw him into an empty well, a cistern, a dry well. Now, Reuben convinces them not to kill him, just to throw him in the well, and then Reuben leaves to try to figure out how he's going to get his brothers to go along with him on not killing Joseph. And while he's doing that, a caravan comes by, and the brothers, being good brothers, they said, why waste this? Let's make a little money. And so they sell him to this caravan for 20 pieces of silver. Now he is a slave. And he enters into Egypt, the most powerful nation on the earth at the time. He enters into Egypt, and he gets sold to an Egyptian master. We find this part in Genesis 39, 2 through 6. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all of that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, this is so fascinating, that he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now, he walks around for 17 years in a very favored coat, and now he ends up in Egypt, and he is a manservant. Now, so I watch Downton Abbey. And so, this is, one of the head butler's coat. Let me borrow it. And so he winds up, and there's a stark difference between these two coats, isn't there? It's a stark difference between these two coats. Now, I'm sure he didn't wear this coat, but he was identified as a servant in the household. Now, did you notice that it said that God's favor still rested on Joseph? And they say, well, if God's favor rested on Joseph, then why would not have God help him avoid the pit and then this position? And that's because we read favor differently than God reads it. God sees beginning from end. There was something that God had for Joseph, and Joseph was going to have to walk a path to get to this place. But we see everything through our eyes, and we actually see God in our image. And we say, well, if God's in my image, then God will do what I think is best, do what I think is favor. How in the world could imprisonment, or how in the world could in servanthood be favor? But here's what's really, really cool. You don't read anything in the Scripture that he flooded God's inbox with complaints. Woe is me. What am I doing in this position? When are you going to get me out of this position? What he did was he discovered, I think, some of the gifts God had placed in his life that he never, ever knew existed before. Why? Because I think he was the spoiled kid that didn't have to do anything. At 17, he ought to have been in the fields with his brothers. But now he learns that he is an unbelievably great steward. He is a good manager. He can handle the affairs of this household. And he puts himself into doing those tasks. And God favors him and blesses him so much that Potiphar, a very well-to-do man, a man of authority, doesn't concern himself with anything else in his house but eating. Now, I know there's some wives in here who believe your husbands have already, found that position, right? They don't concern themselves with anything other. But it's not really true. But Potiphar it was. And so now you can see that he's gone from this fear of being sold, and now he gets settled into his circumstance, and he's probably liking it okay. It says Potiphar didn't withhold anything from him. But then Potiphar had a wife that found Joseph very appealing. He was a good-looking man. He was a good-looking man. He had the favor of God on his life. Things were prospering, and she started plotting to seduce Joseph. And it had gotten to the point after Joseph had rebuffed her and rebuffed her and rebuffed her, it came to a particular day where she cleared the household of all the servants, and she set it up and planned that this would be the day that she would get Joseph. And they're in a room together. She grabs his coat, and instead of succumbing to that pressure, he sheds the coat and he runs. That's always good advice, gentlemen. He sheds his coat and he runs. Well, now she's left holding his coat. What's her story going to be? Well, she turned the tables. Potiphar gets home. She tells him, your servant Joseph tried to seduce me. Well, he throws him in prison. Genesis 39, 20 through 23. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. It says, but while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. But it seems like this thing is going backwards for Joseph. Highly favored, And then he was given this position. Now, it was a safe position. Well, now he finds himself in prison. And I'll tell you, his robe fit him very well. And I'm sure that his garments in Potiphar's house fit him really well. But they don't concern a whole lot about fashion in prison. And now he's in prison. But even in prison, what I read to you shows that the favor of God followed Joseph. And so what was done in part at Potiphar's house is now being brought up to a higher level. There's a higher level of organization in this prison. There was much more at stake in the prison. There was many more things to manage in the prison, yet he does them in a manner that the warden of the prison leaves the prisoner in charge of the prison. And the results, everything that he did, God favored. But he's in a prison. But again, nowhere in the Scripture does it indicate that he's asking God, what am I doing in the prison? I sure wish I was back with my father in my fancy coat. What happened to all of that, God? I can't believe that you stuck me here. What do you expect me to do in here? When is this prison sentence going to end? It seems he does what he did with Potiphar. What has God given me to do? God's gifted me to be a manager and a steward. All right, where am I? I'm in a prison. It doesn't smell like Potiphar's house. It's not like being at Dad's house, but you know what? I'm here. So what am I going to do? I'm going to sit here and complain, or I'm going to get after what God has put in my hand to do. He's told me to manage and steward. I'll manage and steward. That's what I'm good at. That's what I'll do. And he goes to manage and steward, and the warden elevates him to the highest position there in the prison. Then on a particular day, the Pharaoh had thrown two of his officials in. Well, officials was probably not the exact word. He threw a cupbearer, but a cupbearer wasn't someone who just brought the cup to the Pharaoh to drink. He was also probably an advisor to Pharaoh. So the cupbearer is in prison, and the baker. I'm not sure what the baker did. The scone didn't taste right. I don't know. But the baker winds up there too. So you get the baker and the cupbearer, and they have successive dreams. Joseph was familiar with dreams. And so he interprets their dreams, and he basically says the cupbearer will gain his life. The baker will die. After a period of time, the cupbearer and the baker get summoned before Pharaoh, and sure enough, the cupbearer is restored to his position, and the baker is killed. Now, Joseph asked for one favor. When you're before Pharaoh, will you tell him who I am? Oh, of course, right? When you're in trouble and someone offers to help, they can ask for anything, you're going to say yes, right? But then it says that 2 years passed. 2 years passed. The cupbearer, I think, just glad he's living. He's not about to bring somebody up out of the prison. He's just going, I'm living, I'm going to carry on. But then Pharaoh has a dream. 2 dreams back to back, and no one can interpret them. The first dream he has is the 7, in the scripture he says, scrawny, ugly cows. Well, they came and they consumed 7 plump, full, big old cows. Ronnie, you could recognize this, can't you? There's 7 big cows. But after these 7 big cows, 7 scrawny cows eat the 7 big cows, and they still look scrawny. And then his other dream was that there was this stalk of wheat with 7 heads, and they were plump, and they were ready for harvest, and yet then 7 scrawny, dried up heads appear on the same stalk and consume the others. And no one can figure out what this dream is. And then the cupbearer remembers, hey, there was a guy in prison. And this guy in prison can interpret these dreams. And Joseph comes before Pharaoh. We find this moving through Genesis 41, 33 through 46. And, here's the explanation of the dream. Joseph goes before Pharaoh and says, here's what's going to happen. There's going to be 7 years of plenty, and it's going to be followed by 7 years of famine. Okay? That's the interpretation of the dream. Pharaoh, there's going to be 7 years of plenty, and it's going to be followed by 7 years of famine. But Joseph doesn't stop there. In verse 33, he tells him what he should do. Now think about this. The prisoner in the prison coat, he's telling Pharaoh, most powerful person in the world at the time, not only what the dream was, but Pharaoh, this is how you should take care of this. It says, now, let Pharaoh look for a discerning and a wise man. Put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. So the plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. And Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Can we find anyone like this man in whom the Spirit of God is? He's turning to all these other officials dressed up in these fancy robes, and he's saying, do you guys got better advice than this? No. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. It's like the guy just hit the lottery. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen, put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and the people shouted before him, make way. Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. And then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift a hand or a foot in Egypt. Are you kidding me? And so he takes off the flannel-lined, 40-pound Williamson County jail jacket. And he gets issued this robe of honor and this robe of a ruler. Now, it took 13 years. He's 30 years old now. It took him from age 17, 13 years, through the cistern, through Potiphar's house, and through the prison to get to this position. 13 years for God to shape him. 13 years for God to change his heart. 13 years for God to mature him. And in each specific place, all he did was do what he put his hand to do. He did unto the Lord. And now he's in charge. 7 years of abundance go by, and then 2 years of famine starts to happen. And now his family, who thought he was dead back home, they're starving now. And Jacob hears that there's grain in Egypt, and he sends his boys after that grain. Now, he's 30. It's been 13 years, and then you add another 7 for abundance. Okay, now he's 37. That's 20 years, and now we're 2 years into the famine. He's 32. All right, it's been 22 years, if I did my math right. 22 years removed. His brothers now are coming. Is that right? Huh? Yeah, okay. The water, it's just real cold. But he's been 22 years removed from his family. And they come and they don't recognize that it's Joseph. And so they buy the grain that they need, and then Joseph sticks the money back in their bags. He had quizzed them on their family. He wanted to know if his dad was alive. He wanted to know if Benjamin, if the little baby, he wanted to know if he was alive and how he was doing. And so they had come. He told them very specifically. He wanted them to bring Benjamin back, and they just didn't. They weren't complying. But when they left Simeon there at one particular time. But the way the story progresses is that they don't know it's him. They go back, they go through all the food, and now they've got to go back again. And they knew that they shouldn't go back unless they brought Benjamin. So they bring Benjamin this time. When they bring Benjamin, Joseph has to collect himself. He has to leave the room to come back because his heart's so full. He puts the grain, all the grain they can carry, puts the money back in their pouches, and then takes a goblet, and he hides the goblet, has the goblet hidden in Benjamin's sack, and he sends them on his way. But then he tracks them down. He says, someone's stolen from my house. All the brothers say, well, that person will need to die. And then it comes in its Benjamin's sack. Now they all come back. And when they all come back, it's about all that he can take. And he lets them know that it's their brother. Genesis 45, 4 through 8 says this. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there's been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there'll be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, Lord of his entire household, and the ruler of all of Egypt. Then he sends them back and says, go bring Dad. And so the whole family ends up in Egypt. Now, this is a really, really, really big deal, because God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, these patriarchs. Jacob is the last one, Israel. When they enter Egypt, the first chapter of Exodus said that when they got there, they brought 69 with them. Joseph made 70, so 70 people enter Egypt now in the middle of this famine, 2 years into this famine. But yet it says when they leave Egypt 400 years later, it doesn't even give a number. It just says the land was filled with them. They were too numerous to count. The land was filled with them. Jacob lives a full life. Jacob dies. And when Jacob dies, Joseph's brothers begin to fear for their own life. Maybe Joseph just showed us favor because Dad was alive. But now that Dad is dead, what's going to happen? Verse 18, chapter 50. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. We are your slaves, they said. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Do you see how perspective changes Joseph? That what he saw at the very beginning is completely different what he saw at the end. And he sees now that the progression of his life had to take those progressions to get them to that place. And he saw that his role was so crucial that it lent itself to the saving of Israel. There's so many parallels to Joseph's story as it even points to Christ's story. You know, there was a high priest that even said at the height of all the conflict, it's better for one man to die than a whole nation to die. Little did they know that that's exactly what Jesus had intended. That he was going to die so that many would be saved. Perspective is something that you and I have a very hard time gaining because we get in circumstances that are very difficult, maybe very even hard. Michael, come on up. I mean, I'm not talking about that, you got a bill you didn't expect in the mail. I'm talking about the things that take your breath away things. The losing of a job or the loss of a loved one or reputation being sullied or whatever it may be. I'm talking about kick in the gut kind of stuff that find yourself on your face in your bedroom saying, Lord, why? Has there been times even recently that you've asked those questions? Lord, why? And why me? Why now? And see, what we're in desperate need of in those times is perspective. This 10,000-foot perspective. One that can see the beginning of our days from the end of our days. And I know that when you get kicked in the gut and you get the wind knocked out of you, that it's hard to have perspective. And that's why it's important to remember who does have perspective. That God has ordained our days. That He sees the beginning one from the end one. That He's plotting out the path. My requests are, Lord, plot a straight line. Give me a steady growth curve. But we're looking at this steady growth curve, and God's looking at how He's shaping us, what He's molding into us. So how do you handle the times that you don't want to be in? And the best advice I have is what I pull from Joseph. The way to handle the times that I don't want to be in is to say, Lord, you have these times. This must be a path to me being shaped. What do I do during these times? I do whatever my hand finds to do. I do it to the glory of the Lord. When I did the eulogy for my mom's funeral, and I knew that she had her employer at the present came to the funeral, and my mom would take chemotherapy and then she would go to work, or she'd schedule chemotherapy after work and then she'd go home, and it amazed them. They didn't understand how she could do it, but I had seen her do stuff like that all my life. And here's what I said. I said, my mom, a lot of employers loved my mom working for them and thought that she really did a good job for them. I said, but what they didn't realize is that my mom never worked for them. That everything she put her hand to, she did to the glory and honor of God. And as a result, she was very blessed and favored. And she found herself able to do that in circumstances that even took her breath away, because she wasn't doing anything except for the Father. And so when you hit these circumstances where you don't want to be in and they've knocked the wind out of you, instead of, it's fine. God doesn't mind our questions of why but I think you'd be better served to embrace where you are and say, okay, God, now what would you like me to do here? And it's something wildly off in anybody's imagination. Is, well, what has God given you to do? What are you good at? What has He gifted you to do? Well, do those. Do what you know to do in whatever circumstance you find yourself. Last week we talked a lot about this idea of picking up our cross as opposed to our baggage and our agenda and our bag of tricks. And to pick up the cross is to surrender and be obedient to God in the circumstance. And that if we do that on a daily basis, as He says, if we'll deny ourselves and take up our cross daily, we are His disciples. That if every day we will surrender and obey to the Father, then that path leads to the resurrection power of Christ. When we do our own way, our own path, it leads to us being alone. So even if you feel alone in a circumstance, if you surrender yourself to Christ, obedient to Him, to pick up the cross, I guarantee you that this pattern that we see in Joseph's life follows through. So to recap, here are the things that I've learned again and again going through Joseph. That God uses every one of my life circumstances to grow me. He uses abandonment, prison, royalty, slavery, favored. He uses all of these to grow me. My growth comes as I surrender to God, not by me fighting God. I don't grow a lick fighting God. I grow when I surrender to God. I think Joseph teaches us if we handle the small things with honor, God trusts us with the larger things. Where are you? What are you in the middle of? Can you change your perspective and handle those things with honor? The last one for me was Joseph was able to forgive because he saw God's hand. How many times do we want to hold against someone who we think's put us in that circumstance? We want to hold it against them. And that bitterness causes us to stay stuck. Joseph is able, at the end of these 22 years, to see his brothers put him there, right? You could go there. You put me here. In any of those times, he could have said, you put me here. It was your fault. But he ends up at the end. We're not at the end of our story. He ends up at the end of his story and says, wow, now I can see why, and this wouldn't have happened if that did not take place. In his perspective, he's able to forgive. The most powerful words to me on the cross is when Jesus says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. His perspective was, this is where I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be hanging on this cross for the redemption of man. That's why I'm supposed to be here. They don't understand this. It doesn't matter what they're acting out of. They don't understand it. This is God's plan ordained from the beginning of time, so I'm forgiving them. Sometimes unforgiveness in your situation is what is stopping up that dam. You are too busy pointing fingers and assigning blame that you can't get unstuck from that particular circumstance. One of the people getting baptized at 11, she told me that it was fascinating as I tried to understand her story. She was in here on a Sunday. Pastor Joel was preaching a message about forgiveness. And she said it was after that message I was able to forgive a bunch of people in my life. And once I forgave them, it was like 2 Sundays later that she gave her heart to Christ. And it just was fascinating to me because generally speaking, it's like I receive the love of God and then I give forgiveness. And she said, for me, it was when I was able to forgive, then my heart was open so that I could receive forgiveness. It was so neat. You need to stay for 11. So we end up now at the end of this message, and the question I've got to ask you is, where are you? Where are you right now? Not where were you yesterday or where you want to be. Where are you? Philippians 1:6 is a very favorite scripture of many people. It says, being confident of this, he who begun a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. It is a continual, he will carry it. My confidence rests and that he will continue. He doesn't take a break. He doesn't stop. There's going to be a continual bringing you along to completion. And I want to know, where are you now? And here are the things that I believe will release you from those places or will solidify what God's doing in your life in those places. I wrote down 3 things that I know that I'm going to do. One, I'm going to say, I surrender in my circumstance. Can you do that? Can you be in the middle of your circumstance and say, I surrender to the circumstance? I'm not going to fight it anymore. I'm not going to try to figure out how I get out of the circumstance. I surrender in my circumstance. Second, I will do all that I know to do to the glory and honor of God in the middle of my circumstance. I'm going to honor God and glorify God. So what does that look like, Pastor? I guarantee you, if you ask, Lord, what do you want me to do here? How should I be handling myself here? You will get clear and simple instructions. I believe that. The last one is I will position my heart to forgive and not hold anything against anyone for my present position. I'm going to surrender to God in my circumstance. I'm going to ask God how he would have me walk in this circumstance. And I will forgive any who I feel like, placed me in this circumstance. See, even now, just looking at it, and I know a number of your stories. If you sat with me for 5 minutes, even after the message, I'd be able to help you understand, even how I'm seeing you and my mind's working, of where I know you are and what this word fits you. But I believe the Holy Spirit's doing it right now too. So this last song that we sang during worship, I'm going to have Michael sing it again. And here is your response. If you will surrender to the Lord in your circumstance, if you will ask him to guide you in honor and obedience in that circumstance, and that you will forgive those that you feel like has put you in that position, if you stand up as we're singing, I believe that is your moniker and your movement of saying, I surrender to the Lord. So you ponder, you meditate that in your heart, and you pray for a moment as you're there, and as Michael sings. When you're ready to do that, when you're ready to say, I surrender into that circumstance, I just want you to stand up, and we'll pray as we conclude.
Only you can tame the sun, tell it when to rise and set. It's only you already live in all the days I've not seen yet, so why should I worry? Why should I fear? You're my strength, you're my soul. Though the darkness rages on, you're my shelter, my defense, my hope, my rock, my confidence. It's only you would choose to make yourself a prisoner of the grave. It's only you could rise again, victorious with power to save. So why should I worry? Oh, why should I fear? I know you're my strength, you're my song. Though the darkness rages on, I know you're my shelter, my defense, my hope, my rock, my confidence. You are my hope, my rock, my confidence.
Some of the greatest testimonies you ever hear from believers are ones in which they had walked through and endured great hardship. And the reason why we gain so much confidence in that is because we've seen they've come out on the other side and they've got perspective. And their perspective gives us great courage. Today, I want you to take away that Psalm 139, that He has ordained your days. He sees the beginning one from the end. And so He's able then to speak into your life and saying, be confident of this very thing, that what I have begun and started in you, I will continually carry it out to its completion, that there is an end He's walking you to. I want you to leave today in faith and confidence. The circumstance has not changed. The people in your circumstance has not changed. But the Holy Spirit can change you. And you can walk in His confidence and not with everything else staying exactly the same. But I guarantee you, when you face it like that, it starts changing colors. It'll start changing colors. Lord, I pray for my brothers and sisters in Christ today, Lord. I pray that you would today strengthen them according to your strength, not ours. Lord, we surrender and we lay at the altar our weakness, Lord, our heartache, our frustration, our anger, our disillusionment, our unforgiveness. Lord, we lay it down today and we pick up your cross. We surrender to you. We pick up obedience. We pick up glory. We pick up honor of you today. And Lord, in doing so, we pick up and leave with your strength, not ours. We leave in your strength, not ours. Can you do that? I pray that you can. All triggered by surrender. Let's all stand for the benediction. Now may the Lord bless you and keep you. May He make His face to shine on you, be gracious to you, and grant you peace. And you're rising up, and you're laying down, and you're going out, and you're coming in, both now and forevermore. God bless you in the name of